Marcus Chun pressed his ear against the thin bedroom wall for the third time that week, listening intently to the soft murmuring coming from apartment 3B. The voice was always there after midnight, a woman speaking in hushed, urgent tones, though. He could never quite make out the words. It sounded like she was having a conversation, pausing as if waiting for responses that never came. The irony wasn't lost on him. After months of apartment hunting on his meager graduate student budget, Marcus had finally found a place he could afford in the old brownstone building on Maple Street. The landlord had been almost too eager to rent him Unit 3A, practically throwing the keys at him during their brief meeting. Now Marcus understood why the rent was so cheap. Probably just thin walls and inconsiderate neighbors, he muttered to himself, pulling away from the wall. But even as he said it, something felt off. He'd been living here for 2 weeks now, and he'd never seen anyone coming or going from 3B. No footsteps in the hallway, no sounds of daily life, just that voice, every single night between midnight and dawn. Marcus was a practical person. He was working on his master's thesis in applied mathematics, spending most of his days buried in equations and statistical models. He didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural nonsense. There had to be a logical explanation for what he was hearing. The next evening, Marcus decided to investigate. He positioned himself in the hallway around 11:45 p.m., pretending to check his mailbox while keeping an eye on apartment 3B. The building was quiet except for the occasional creak of old wood settling. Mrs. Patterson from 2C had her television on, the blue glow visible under her door. Mr. Rodriguez in 1A was playing his guitar softly, the melody drifting up through the floors. But apartment 3B remained dark and silent. At exactly 12:17 a.m., the voice began. Marcus crept closer to the door, his heart beating faster than he cared to admit. The woman's voice was clearer now, though still muffled by the door. She sounded young, maybe in her 20s, with a slight accent he couldn't identify. She seemed to be telling a story about a garden, something about roses and morning dew. Her tone was wistful, almost pleading. Marcus tried the door handle, expecting it to be locked. To his surprise, it turned easily. The door swung open with a soft creak, revealing nothing but darkness and the musty smell of a space that had been closed up for too long. The voice stopped immediately. Marcus fumbled for the light switch, his hands shaking slightly. When the dim overhead bulb flickered on, he found himself looking at a completely empty apartment. No furniture, no personal belongings, not even dust covers or signs that anyone had lived there recently. The floorboards were bare and warped with age, and there were water stains on the ceiling that spoke of years of neglect. But the strangest part was the silence. Not just the absence of the voice he'd been hearing, but a deeper quiet that seemed to absorb sound rather than simply lacking it. Even his own breathing sounded muffled and distant. Marcus stood in the doorway for several long minutes, waiting for some explanation to present itself. The rational part of his mind insisted that he must have been hearing sounds from another apartment, carried through the building's old ventilation system, or distorted by the architecture. But standing there in that empty, silent space, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him from the shadows. The voice never returned that night, but Marcus barely slept. He kept thinking about the way it had stopped the moment he'd opened the door, as if whoever was speaking had known instantly that someone was listening, as if she had been waiting for him to find her. Dolores Winters had been managing the Riverside Manor apartments for 37 years, and in all that time, she had never once shown apartment 3B to a prospective tenant. She kept the key on a separate ring in her desk drawer, wrapped in a piece of black cloth that her grandmother had given her decades ago. When Marcus knocked on her door the next morning, looking haggard and confused, Dolores knew immediately what he was going to ask about. She'd seen that same expression on the faces of everyone who'd ever lived in 3A. The thin walls were a curse and a blessing. They kept most people away, but they also meant that someone, eventually, would always hear Cordelia. "Mrs. Winters," Marcus began, shifting nervously from foot to foot, "I need to ask you about the apartment next to mine." Dolores sighed and stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter her cluttered office on the ground floor. The room smelled of old paper and lavender tea, and every surface was covered with rental agreements, maintenance requests, and faded photographs of the building from its earlier days. "Sit down, dear," she said, pouring him a cup of tea without asking if he wanted one. "I suppose it's time someone knew the truth." Marcus accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping his cold hands around the warm ceramic. "I've been hearing a voice through the walls, a woman's voice. But when I checked the apartment, it was completely empty." "Of course it was," Dolores said matter-of-factly. 3B has been empty since 1987. Well, empty of living tenants, anyway. "The way she said it made Marcus's stomach drop. "What do you mean?" Dolores pulled out an old photo album and flipped through pages of yellowed newspaper clippings and building records. This building was constructed in 1924, but the strange things didn't start until 1952. That's when Professor Edmund Blackwood rented 3B for his ... experiments. She showed Marcus a newspaper clipping from 1952. The headline read, "Local Professor. Missing after laboratory accident." The accompanying photo showed a distinguished man with wire-rimmed glasses, standing next to what appeared to be some kind of scientific apparatus. Edmund was studying dimensional physics, theoretical stuff that was way ahead of his time. He claimed he could prove the existence of parallel realities. His daughter Cordelia used to help him with his work. Brilliant girl, studying physics. At the university, Dolores turned the page, revealing a photo of a young woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes. She looked to be about 25, wearing a simple dress that spoke of the early 1950s. The experiment went wrong on October 13, 1952. The neighbors reported hearing a terrible sound, like reality itself was being torn apart. When the police finally broke down the door, they found the apartment destroyed and both Edmund and Cordelia gone. But here's the thing, there was nowhere for them to go. The windows were still locked from the inside, and 3B was on the second floor. Marcus stared at the photograph of Cordelia, recognition dawning on him. The voice he'd been hearing, it matched the face in the picture perfectly. "Edmund's body was found 3 days later in the river," Dolores continued. "But Cordelia, she was never found. The official report said she must have fled the scene, but I know better. She never left that apartment. She's still there, just not in the way we understand existence." "You're telling me I've been hearing a ghost?" "Not exactly a ghost," Dolores said carefully. "More like someone who got caught between worlds. Edmund's experiment didn't kill Cordelia. It displaced her. She's alive, but she's existing in a space that overlaps with our reality just enough for sensitive people to hear her." Marcus thought about all the tenants who had lived in 3A over the years. How many people have heard her? 17, counting you. Most of them moved out within days. A few tried to help her, but Dolores's voice trailed off, and she pulled out another folder. 3 of them disappeared entirely. Just like Edmund and Cordelia. The weight of what she was telling him settled on Marcus like a heavy blanket. "Why are you telling me this? Why haven't you sealed off the apartment or called someone?" Dolores laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Who would I call? The police think I'm a crazy old woman. Scientists won't take it seriously without proof. And the proof has a tendency to make people vanish." She leaned forward, her eyes serious. "But maybe you're different. You're studying mathematics, aren't you? You might understand the science behind what Edmund was trying to do. Maybe you're..." the one who can finally help Cordelia find her way home. As Marcus left Dolores's office, his mind reeling with everything she told him, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn into something much larger and more dangerous than he'd bargained for. But the image of Cordelia's face from the photograph stayed with him, and despite his fear, he found himself wanting to help the woman whose voice had been calling out through the walls for over 70 years. James Holloway had been a meticulous man, which was why his journal entries from 1987 were so detailed and disturbing. Marcus discovered the leather-bound notebook wedged behind a loose baseboard in his bedroom closet, wrapped in plastic and hidden as if James had known someone would eventually need to find it. The journal began innocuously enough. March 15, 1987. Moved into 3A today. Rent is cheap. Building has character. Neighbor in 3B seems quiet. Perfect for a writer trying to finish his novel. March 18, 1987. Strange dreams last night. Kept hearing someone calling my name, but when I woke up, the building was silent. Probably just adjustment anxiety. March 23, 1987. The voice is back. Not in dreams this time. I'm definitely awake when I hear it. A woman sounds distressed. Knocked on 3B's door, but no answer. Maybe she works odd hours. Marcus found himself reading by lamplight, afraid to put the journal down. James's handwriting grew increasingly erratic as the entries progressed. April 2, 1987. Talked to Mrs. Kowalski, the previous property manager. She got very pale when I mentioned 3B, said it's been empty for years, but the rent records show. Someone named C. Blackwood still pays monthly, always cash, left in an envelope under the office door. How is that possible? April 8, 1987. Found old newspaper clippings at the library. Edmund Blackwood, dimensional physics experiments, daughter missing. The photo of Cordelia Blackwood matches the voice perfectly. I know that sounds insane, but I've started to recognize the cadence of her speech, the way she pauses between sentences. April 15, 1987. She spoke directly to me tonight. Said my name clear as day through the wall. When I pressed my ear against it, I could swear I felt warmth on the other side, like someone was pressing back. Marcus's hands were shaking as he turned the pages. The entries became more frequent, sometimes multiple per day. April 20th, 1987. I've been researching Edmund's work. Found some of his papers in the university archives. His theories about dimensional barriers were revolutionary but untested. He believed consciousness could exist independently of physical form under the right conditions. What if he was right? What if Cordelia is conscious but displaced? April 25th, 1987. She told me her story tonight. She remembers the experiment. Her father was trying to open a window between dimensions. She volunteered to be the test subject because she believed in his work. But something went wrong. Instead of opening a door, the experiment created a crack. She fell through it and has been trying to find her way back ever since. May 1st, 1987. I've been having the same dream for 3 nights. I'm standing in a laboratory filled with strange machines. Cordelia is there, but she's translucent, like she's made of light. She's begging me to help her complete her father's work. She says the answer is in the equations he left behind. Marcus paused his reading, remembering what Dolores had said about 3 tenants disappearing. A chill ran down his spine as he continued. May 5th, 1987. Found Edmund's hidden laboratory equipment in the basement storage room. Mrs. Kowalski doesn't know about it. There's a false wall behind the old furnace. Everything is still there, covered in dust, but intact. Cordelia says if I can recreate the experiment with the correct modifications, it can bring her home. May 10th, 1987. I know this is dangerous, but I can't ignore her anymore. She's been trapped for 35 years. She's not a ghost. She's a living person caught in a dimensional fold. The mathematics are complex, but I think I understand what Edmund was trying to do. May 15th, 1987. Started working on the machine. Cordelia guides me through the wall each night. Her knowledge of her father's work is perfect. She remembers every equation, every calibration. She says time moves differently where she is. For her, it's only been weeks since the original experiment. Final entries were written in an increasingly desperate scrawl. May 20th, 1987. Almost ready. Cordelia is getting stronger. I can see shadows of her now, moving in 3B when the light hits just right. She says when the dimensional barrier weakens enough, she'll be able to return. But she also warned me the process might pull me in if I'm not careful. May 22nd, 1987. Tonight's the night. If this works, Cordelia will be free. If it doesn't, well, if someone finds this journal, they'll know what happened to me. The machine is calibrated perfectly. All I have to do is activate the sequence and step back. Cordelia promises it will. Work this time. The journal ended there. Marcus flipped through the remaining pages, but they were blank. James Holloway had vanished on May 22, 1987, just like the others who had tried to help Cordelia. But unlike the others, James had left behind a roadmap. Hidden in the back cover of the journal were detailed diagrams and equations, copied from Edmund's original work and modified based on Cordelia's guidance. As Marcus studied the mathematical formulas, his graduate training allowed him to understand the elegant logic behind the dimensional theory. It was brilliant, revolutionary, and absolutely terrifying. Marcus closed the journal and sat in his dark bedroom, listening to the silence from 3B. He now knew exactly how to help Cordelia return home. The question was whether he was brave enough to risk becoming the fourth person to disappear in the attempt. That night, Marcus positioned himself directly against the wall between his bedroom and apartment 3B. Armed with James's journal and a recording device, he waited for Cordelia's voice to return. When it finally came at 12:47 a.m., he was ready. "Cordelia," he said softly, speaking to the wall. "I know you can hear me. I found James's journal." The voice stopped immediately, followed by a silence so profound that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Then, barely above a whisper, "James? Is that you?" "No, my name is Marcus. I live in 3A now. James." James disappeared in 1987. Another long pause. When Cordelia spoke again, her voice carried a weight of grief that made Marcus's chest ache. "He tried to help me. I told him it was dangerous, but he wouldn't listen. The dimensional barrier, it's unstable. When someone tries to cross from your side, they risk being pulled into the fold with me." "Tell me what happened," Marcus said, settling against the wall. "I want to understand." And so Cordelia began her story, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. Marcus recorded every word, but more than that, he listened with his heart. "My father was obsessed with proving that reality had layers," she began. "He believed consciousness could exist independently of the physical body if the right conditions were created. I was 26, working on my doctorate in theoretical physics. I believed in his vision completely." As she spoke, Marcus began to see flickering shadows moving across his bedroom wall, as if someone were walking on the other side with a candle. The experiment was supposed to be simple. Dad had built a device that could thin the barrier between dimensional planes. The theory was that consciousness could pass through while maintaining its integrity. I volunteered because I had studied the mathematics extensively. I knew the risks. The shadows grew more distinct. Marcus could make out the silhouette of a woman pacing back and forth. When Dad activated the machine, everything went wrong immediately. Instead of creating a controlled opening, it tore a hole in reality itself. I felt myself being pulled apart and put back together simultaneously. "The last thing I remember from your world Was the laboratory exploding around us? But you survived, Marcus said. I'm not sure survived is the right word. I exist, but not in the way you understand existence. I'm caught in a fold between dimensions, close enough to your reality that sensitive people can hear me, but too far removed to physically interact with your world. The shadow on the wall stopped pacing and seemed to turn toward Marcus. For a moment, he could swear he saw the outline of a face looking directly at him. Time works differently here, Cordelia continued. For you, it's been over 70 years. For me, it feels like months. I can perceive your world like watching a movie through thick glass. I see tenants come and go, seasons change, the building aging around me. But I can't touch anything, can't influence anything except through sound. Why can some people hear you and others can't? I think it has to do with sensitivity to dimensional fluctuations. People with certain types of minds, creative types, scientists, mathematicians, seem more attuned to the frequencies I exist on. James could hear me clearly. So can you? Marcus looked at the equations in James's journal. James thought he could bring you back. He could have, Cordelia said sadly. His modifications to Dad's work were correct. But the process requires someone on your side to anchor the dimensional bridge while I cross over. The anchor person. They have to enter the fold temporarily. 3 people have tried to help me, and all 3 got lost in the dimensional space. Lost how? The fold isn't stable. It's like a maze with no exit, except the ones that randomly appear. Dad got lost in it when the original experiment failed. James William Chun in 1976 and Margaret Torres in 1994. They all entered the fold to help me and couldn't find their way back out. Marcus felt a chill run through him. Are they dead? No, they're here with me. We exist together in this strange space between worlds. They're not hurt, but they can't return to your reality any more than I can. Every time someone tries to help me, I risk trapping another innocent person. The shadow on the wall seemed to slump with despair. That's why I've been trying to warn you away. When I realized you could hear me clearly, I knew you'd eventually try to help. But I can't bear the thought of trapping someone else in here with me. Marcus stared at the equations in the journal, his mathematical mind working through the possibilities. What if there was a way to stabilize the dimensional bridge? Something James didn't think of? Marcus, please don't. I've had 70 years to think about this problem. If there was a safe way, I would have found it by now. But Marcus was already lost in the mathematics, seeing patterns and possibilities that his advanced education made visible. Cordelia, what if the anchor person didn't have to enter the fold at all? What if we could create a quantum entanglement between your dimensional space and ours? For the first time since he'd been hearing her voice, Cordelia was completely silent. When she finally spoke, there was something new in her tone, hope. Explain, she whispered. Marcus spent the next 3 days buried in calculations, barely eating or sleeping. He filled notebook after notebook with equations, building on Edmund's original work and James's modifications, while incorporating modern quantum physics theories that hadn't existed in the 1950s or even the 1980s. Cordelia guided him through the wall each night, her knowledge of her father's work proving invaluable. But as they worked together, Marcus began to understand the true scope of what they were attempting. The quantum entanglement approach could work, he told her on Thursday night, surrounded by pages of calculations. But it requires a massive energy source to stabilize the dimensional bridge. We're talking about the kind of power that could black out half the city. The university physics lab has a particle accelerator, Cordelia said. If we could access it during off hours, that's breaking and entering, not to mention incredibly dangerous. If something goes wrong, we could tear a permanent hole between dimensions. Marcus, Cordelia's voice was gentle but urgent. I've been trapped here for 71 years. James, William, and Margaret have been here for decades. We're not really living. We're existing in a state of suspended animation. If there's even a chance this could work. Marcus understood what she wasn't saying. This might be their only opportunity. His mathematical background was more advanced than any of the previous tenants who had tried to help her. If he couldn't solve this problem, no one could. That Friday night, Marcus made his decision. Using James's detailed notes, he located Edmund's hidden laboratory in the basement. Everything was exactly as James had described, covered in dust but still functional. Marcus spent hours cleaning and calibrating the dimensional apparatus, following the modifications James had planned but never completed. At midnight, he activated the first phase of the experiment. The machine hummed to life with a sound like distant thunder. The air in the basement seemed to thicken, and Marcus could feel the dimensional barrier beginning to weaken. Through the walls, he heard Cordelia's voice more clearly than ever before. "Marcus, I can see your world clearly now. The fold is opening, but it's unstable. You need to be ready to reverse the polarity the moment I cross over." Marcus's hands hovered over the controls, his heart pounding. "Cordelia, if this doesn't work, then at least we tried. And Marcus, thank you. No matter what happens, thank you for believing in me." The dimensional bridge activated with a flash of blue light that filled the entire basement. For a moment, Marcus could see directly into the fold, a strange shimmering space where four figures stood together, translucent but clearly human. Cordelia stepped forward, her hand reaching toward the barrier. But as she began to cross over, the machine started to overload. Sparks flew from the control panel, and Marcus realized he had seconds to choose. Shut down the experiment and lose. Their only chance, or risk everything to bring them all home. The others. Cordelia called out as the bridge began to collapse. "Marcus, can you expand the aperture? We can all cross together if you increase the power." Marcus's hand moved to the power controls. Increasing the energy flow would either save all four trapped people or destroy the entire building. There was no middle ground. In that moment of decision, Marcus thought about his quiet, predictable life before moving to apartment 3A. He thought about all the nights he'd heard Cordelia's voice calling through the wall, desperate and alone. He thought about James, William, and Margaret, trapped in a space between worlds for decades. He turned the power to maximum. The dimensional bridge flared with brilliant light. Through the expanding aperture, Marcus watched as all four figures stepped through together. Cordelia first, her face radiant with hope, followed by James, then an older man who must have been William, and finally a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. But as they crossed into his reality, Marcus felt an incredible force pulling at him. The quantum entanglement he'd created was dragging him toward the fold. In his calculations, he hadn't accounted for the conservation of dimensional mass. Something had to replace what was being removed. As the laboratory began to collapse around him, Marcus smiled. He had solved the equation after all. The bridge required an equal exchange. The last thing he heard before the fold claimed him was Cordelia's voice, now speaking from his world, calling his name in desperate gratitude and grief. When the police investigated the explosion at Riverside Manor Apartments, they found 4 people in the basement who claimed to have been missing for decades. Cordelia Blackwood's story was so impossible that it made national news, though most dismissed it as elaborate hoax. But apartment 3A stood empty now, and sometimes late at night, the new tenants in 3B could hear a voice through the thin walls. A young man speaking softly about mathematics and quantum physics, calling out through the dimensional fold, waiting for someone who could hear him, someone who might understand the equations needed to bring him home. The cycle had begun again.